welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into the life and times of, well, you already know who William Shakespeare.
The man, the myth, the playwright.
Exactly. You know his plays, you can probably even quote a few lines, but how much do you really know about Shakespeare, the man behind the words?
That's what we're here to uncover.
Get ready for some serious intrigue because we're about to separate the man from the myth and maybe even uncover a few secrets along the way. So he was born in 1564, right? In Stratford-upon-Avon.
That's right. Stratford-upon-Avon, not exactly the bustling London scene you might picture for a literary giant.
Definitely not the image that comes to mind. So paint us a picture of what was life like back then in Shakespeare's world.
Picture England on the verge of the Renaissance, a time of immense change, intellectual curiosity, new discoveries, and, yeah, let's not forget the plague.
Oh, right, the plague. I always forget about that part.
It was a fact of life back then. But amidst all that, you have Shakespeare's family. His father was a glove maker.
A glove maker.
Glove maker, leather worker, kind of a jack of all trades.
Yeah.
And his mother, Mary Arden, she came from a well-off family, actually. So their circumstances were comfortable. Not exactly rolling in wealth, but comfortable.
Interesting. So not exactly born with a silver spoon, which you might expect for someone considered one of the greatest writers of all time.
Exactly. And some scholars believe that actually played a huge role in his work.
How so?
Well, they argue that his modest background, his upbringing in a, let's call it grounded environment, made him more in tune with the lives of everyday people, their struggles, their joys, their aspirations. And you see that reflected in his characters, the way he captures the human experience so vividly.
That's a fascinating point. Okay, but we can't talk about Shakespeare's early life without addressing the elephant in the room, Anne Hathaway. He was only 18 when they married. She was 8 years his senior. And to top it off, she was already pregnant.
Now, that's what you call a scandal, even by today's standards.
So what's the story there? Was it a true love story or a marriage of necessity?
Well, the truth, as with much of Shakespeare's life, is shrouded in mystery and speculation. Some historians believe it was a shotgun wedding, plain and simple. They point to the rushed nature of the marriage, the age difference, the pregnancy. It all seems to add up.
It does sound a bit scandalous.
Yeah.
But there's always another side to the story, right?
Right, exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Some scholars argue that betrothal and marriage at a young age, followed by a later formal ceremony, were fairly common back then.
So maybe not as scandalous as we might think.
Maybe not. But then there's that whole second best bed business in Shakespeare's will.
Okay, yes. The infamous second best bed. What was that all about? Was he trying to diss Anne from beyond the grave?
It's certainly one of the most debated aspects of his will. Remember, the best bed was usually reserved for guests, a sign of status rather than affection. So some people interpret leaving Anne the second best bed as a sign of, well, not exactly romantic bliss.
So maybe not the best look?
Maybe not. But hold on, there's another interpretation. Some scholars believe it was actually the bed they shared as a couple, imbued with personal meaning and memories. Leaving it to her could have been a final, private act of love.
Wow, that's a completely different way of seeing it. It's like trying to decipher a secret code.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes studying Shakespeare's life so fascinating. We're left piecing together fragments of information, trying to make sense of the gaps, the ambiguities.
It's like a historical puzzle, but with really high stakes.
And speaking of puzzles, let's move on to what's often called Shakespeare's lost years. From 1585 to 1592, he basically vanishes from the historical record.
Vanishes, like poof, gone. What happened there?
That's the million-dollar question. We have virtually no documented evidence of what he was doing or where he was during those 7 years.
7 years? That's a long time to just disappear.
Tell me about it. It's a frustrating gap that has fueled endless speculation and some pretty wild theories. Some scholars believe he traveled with acting troupes, honing his craft, gaining experience.
Like a Shakespearean road trip. I could see that.
Others think he might have worked as a schoolmaster, a lawyer's assistant, even a soldier.
From playwright to soldier, that's quite a jump.
There's even a persistent myth about him fleeing Stratford after getting caught poaching deer from a local nobleman.
Okay, now that's a story I want to hear more about.
Sadly, it's most likely just a good story. There's really no evidence to support it.
Bummer. I was hoping for a Shakespearean Robin Hood tale. But seriously, with all these theories, do we have any clue what he was really up to during those lost years?
Honestly, your guess is as good as mine. It remains one of the biggest mysteries surrounding Shakespeare's life. But that's part of the allure, wouldn't you say?
Definitely, it just adds to the intrigue. But whatever he was doing during those lost years, he reemerges in London in the early 1590s. And he's not just writing, he's taking the theatrical world by storm.
He went from a small-town guy with a mysterious past to one of the most celebrated playwrights in London, and he did it all in the blink of an eye.
It's like a real-life Shakespearean drama unfolding before our very eyes. Talking about a plot twist. He disappears for a while and suddenly, boom, he's the hottest name in theater.
That's Shakespeare for you, always keeping us guessing. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The theater world back then, it was cutthroat. Rivalries, patrons, censors, you name it.
It sounds more dramatic than one of his plays.
Oh.
And speaking of drama, there were some critics who weren't exactly his biggest fans, right?
Oh, yeah, some people just couldn't handle his success, especially this one guy, Robert Greene.
Greene. Refresh my memory, who was he again?
He was another playwright at the time, university educated, and he saw Shakespeare's sudden rise as a threat. You see, Shakespeare didn't have that fancy education, and Greene couldn't resist taking a jab at him. Famously called him an upstart crow, basically implying that he was out of his league.
Ouch, that's harsh.
It was meant to be. But Shakespeare being Shakespeare, he just brushed it off and let his success do the talking.
The best revenge. But it's amazing to think about, he wasn't just a brilliant writer, he was also a savvy businessman.
Oh, absolutely. People forget that. He was a shareholder in the Globe Theatre, which meant he had a say in how things were run and a share of the profits. He understood the business side of things, which was pretty rare for an artist back then.
So he was like a Renaissance-era entrepreneur.
Exactly. He knew that to make it in the theater world, talent wasn't enough. You needed business sense, and boy, did he have it.
The more we learn about him, the more fascinating he becomes. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about his sonnets. They're like these beautiful mysteries, full of hidden meanings and secret loves.
Ah, the sonnets. They offer a window into Shakespeare's heart, his most intimate thoughts and feelings.
And of course, the big question, who are they written for?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We have the fair youth, who seems to be the object of Shakespeare's admiration, maybe even love, although that's still up for debate.
And then there's the mysterious dark lady, who seems to inspire a whole different set of emotions.
The dark lady is a real enigma. She's captivating, alluring, but also a source of turmoil and frustration for Shakespeare.
It's like he can't resist her, even though he knows it might not end well. Classic Shakespearean drama. But seriously, are there any clues about who these people might have been?
There's been a lot of speculation over the centuries. For the fair youth, some scholars point to Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton, as a likely candidate.
Why him? Was there a connection?
He was a patron of the arts, a big supporter of Shakespeare's work. They definitely knew each other, and some of the sonnets seem to hint at a deeper relationship.
Juicy. And what about the dark lady? Any theories about her true identity?
She is a tougher nut to crack. There's really no consensus. Some think she was a noblewoman, others a courtesan. Whoever she was, she clearly had a profound effect on Shakespeare.
It's fascinating to think about these real-life muses inspiring some of the most beautiful poetry ever written. But Shakespeare's genius wasn't limited to just sonnets and love poems, was it? He also gave us some of the most powerful tragedies ever staged.
Absolutely. Plays like Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, they're masterpieces of human drama, exploring the darkest corners of the human psyche.
And you can't help but wonder, were these tragedies influenced by his own life, his own experiences with loss and heartbreak?
It's impossible to know for sure, but the timing of some of these plays is interesting, especially in relation to the death of Shakespeare's son, Hamnet.
You mean he wrote Hamlet not long after losing his own son?
That's right. Hamnet died in 1596, and Hamlet, with its themes of grief, loss, and the complicated relationship between fathers and sons, it premiered just a few years later.
Wow, that gives me chills. It makes you wonder if Shakespeare poured some of his own grief into that play.
It's certainly possible, and it adds a whole new layer of depth and meaning to those works, don't you think? Suddenly, these characters and their struggles feel even more real, more relatable.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that behind the genius, behind the famous words, there was a man who experienced the same joys and sorrows as the rest of us.
A man who understood the human condition in all its complexity, and that's part of what makes his work so timeless, so universal.
It's incredible to think that centuries later, we're still grappling with the same questions, the same emotions that he explored in his plays.
And that's the beauty of art, isn't it? It transcends time. It connects us across generations.
Speaking of time, Shakespeare's time on Earth eventually came to an end. He retired back to Stratford-upon-Avon, which always seemed like a full-circle moment to me.
It is. And can you imagine achieving such fame and recognition and then choosing to return to the place where it all began?
It says a lot about him, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That maybe in the end, home is where the heart is.
And although he died in 1616, on his birthday of all days, his legacy lives on, more vibrant than ever.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and times of William Shakespeare, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this journey?
I think it's this. Shakespeare wasn't just a writer. He was an observer of humanity. He captured the essence of what it means to be human. The good, the bad, the complicated, the beautiful.
And he did it with such eloquence, such insight, that centuries later, his words still have the power to move us, challenge us, and inspire us.
Exactly. So the next time you encounter Shakespeare, whether it's on stage, in a book, or even just a quote you stumble upon, remember that you're not just reading words on a page. You're engaging with the mind and heart of a genius who understood what it means to be truly alive.
And with that, we come to the end of our Shakespearean adventure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the spirit of the bard alive.
And remember, as Shakespeare himself once wrote, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.